than that. I mean, honestly.
I'm awake.
I'm awake. I'm here. I'm here for it. Welcome.
Thanks.
So today, I think we're going to have a slightly more intimate discussion about just the absolute explosion of esports and the evolution of specifically the Activision and Blizzard games and Overwatch League, the launch of that this year, that have just absolutely propelled esports into the mainstream and I think really transcended a lot of people's expectations in a short period of time. But I would love to get into that by talking about you personally, what your sort of trajectory and transition from traditional sports in that world into esports and sort of how you arrived in your position.
Sure. So I've been at the company for about a year and a half now, and prior to that, I'd spent about a decade in traditional sports media. So immediately prior to this job, I was the head of digital at Fox Sports. And I got to Fox by selling them a company. So I was the founder and CEO of a company called Yardbarker, which was still is a network of sports blogs. I've always sort of identified as an entrepreneur. I've always, imagined, going back as far as I can remember, myself as, as a head of an entrepreneurial venture is something that I started. And so honestly, when I sold Yardbarker to Fox, I thought I'd be at Fox for a year and then I'd be off doing my next startup. That didn't happen. They kind of kept pulling me deeper and deeper into the belly of the beast. And I enjoyed that because, at the time, and I think it's still true, but especially at the time, broadcast media was having a sort of crossroads moment where it needed to decide as an industry whether to double down on the path it was on, which if you think about it, the cable business model is like the greatest business model in the history of the world. You get paid by your distributors per subscriber, whether those subscribers ever watch your content or not. And so there's a lot of energy spent inside the broadcast industry trying to protect that model. But the other path was, the one that maybe was starting to become illuminated by changes in consumer preferences and audiences migrating to digital platforms, audiences expecting their content to not be encumbered by paywalls and that sort of thing. And so I felt like it would be going to a place like Fox would give me a great opportunity to kind of help a big old company like that navigate that choice, a choice of how much to invest in either of those paths. And so my job as the head of digital there was to kind of run out in front of the rest of the company and see what was on the horizon, threats and opportunities, and then come back and share those with my colleagues and plan our approach. And one of the opportunities that I identified, and threats, frankly, was esports. And I spent some time kind of developing a plan for Fox Sports to enter the category in a meaningful way. And in doing so, really developed an appreciation for the space. I've played games my whole life. I think if you were to tell 12-year-old Pete that he was now working at the intersection of sports and video games, like the two things I love the most, I loved the most certainly when I was 12. I would have thought, wow, that sounds pretty good. I think I must have gotten pretty lucky along the way. So I've been kind of a casual gamer my whole life. Never identified as a hardcore gamer. Always played on console. But
same.
Yeah.
I'm at much shame.
No, go console. But I knew enough about the culture of gaming to know that the numbers I was reading were real. The opportunities that I was seeing were real, but also that a lot of the kind of disciplined, sort of work to kind of build structure around sports leagues hadn't been applied to the world of esports yet, and so it just seemed like an awesome opportunity. And so when I met the folks at Activision Blizzard who were looking for someone with a traditional sports media, entrepreneurial tech background. It just seemed like a great fit. So that was a year and a half ago, and lots happened since then.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things we'll see in the panel as we sort of delve into what makes a sport professional is that naturally juxtapositioning the traditional sports leagues with the rise and sort of future domination of esports makes sense, I think, to both of us personally, given our backgrounds. But as we build out the industry, you're going to see a lot of similarities between the two. So I think we can. I feel like the changing viewership patterns of consumers that you mentioned is, you know, a whole other panel for me, but something we can get into in a little bit. Do you think that there is still a misconception among sort of more mainstream folks who may not be esports fans that it's a fad?
I don't hear that as much as I did even like a year ago. It was
at one point even a year ago, just something.
Well, that's because that's like the natural tendency of anyone who isn't familiar with something, you know, to assume that, you know, that it's hype. I think it's like a defense mechanism in a way that I totally understand. I think though in the last year. There's been a lot more education. Just, you know, companies like ours and others in the space, and, you know, the media broadly have done a really good job of explaining this stuff. And so I think that skepticism and cynicism is not what it was even a year ago. I still think there's a lot of education that needs to happen. Absolutely. And I think it's our job, and it's not just our job to like explain what we're doing, it's also our job to structure what we're doing in a way that's easy to explain.
You want something digestible because I mean, if the whole goal is to reach new fans, you know, to really broaden sort of the fan base and accessibility of esports, then that makes complete sense that you want it presented in a way that is informative for casual gamers, people who think they might be interested in learning more about esports, but also the core fan base that really sort of founded that community in the grassroots sense from the early days.
Yeah, and that community deserves a ton of credit for investing their time and energy into building the scene, and also, you know, committing themselves to understand it once it had been built. And I think that there's always going to be kind of a tier of fans who want to go really, really deep to understand all the nuances of you know, the competitive scene and the teams and the game itself. But I think, you know, we're missing a big opportunity if that's the only community we speak to. And so, you know, companies like ours have to be thoughtful about, you know, how the structure of an esports league or scene itself is digested and passed along from person to person. Like, even if you're a hardcore fan, you know, you want your friends to be into the thing you like too, and it'd be nice to be able to explain it, you know, in simple terms to get them excited. And if you think about kind of where esports came from, you know, this sort of bottom-up, grassroots, community-driven, organic, massive, but really pretty unstructured world of esports has always been pretty hard to understand and explain. And I always think, you know, in terms of traditional sports analogies, and you know, esports like of the past decade reminded me of something like boxing, which is
the cultish almost.
Not only certainly the
group of fans that hyper informed of,
who really go out of their way to educate themselves about what's happening in the world of boxing. But also, if you think about boxing, like, part of the reason boxing's so hard to understand is that there are a lot of different circuits, there are a lot of different belts. Anybody can be a fighter, anybody can be a trainer, anybody can be a promoter, anyone can stand up a belt and say this matters, but there's not a clear sense, unless you're, you know, hardcore, there's not a clear sense of like how the belts rank against each other, and like, you know, does one ladder to another, like what matters in boxing. It's really hard to figure it out, actually. And I think it's similar, it has been similar in esports. It's similar, and that leaves people on the sidelines. It leaves like fans on the sidelines who would otherwise be drawn to the scene, but say, I don't have time. And it leaves investors on the sideline who, not just financial investors, although them too, but brands, media partners, anyone who's considering making a bet on the scene because they don't trust themselves. They're like, I don't know if I'm putting my money in the right place or if I'm putting my attention in the right place. Is this thing that I'm betting on even going to be around in 2 years?
So it seems like it's made a really marked shift from looking inward as a community to really looking more outward, like super progressive in finding and collecting new fans who are going to be equally passionate, but perhaps not as informed as.
Well, no, I wouldn't go that far.
Maybe.
I wouldn't go so far as to say they won't be as informed. I think the goal is not to
more previous knowledge anyway. So newer.
Okay. Yeah, they're new to the scene, and so they may not know the history. They can, go deep and learn the history if they want. But I think the idea is like, let's make it easier for people to figure it all out. And that's really one of the hallmarks of like the greatest traditional sports, I think. Like it's pretty easy to understand how an NFL season works. It's pretty easy to understand that the winner of the Super Bowl is the best in the world. These things are taken for granted, but a lot of work went into designing the structures of traditional leagues to make them, easy to wrap your head around and partner with.
So it seems like to sort of encapsulate what we're talking about, the foundations of esports, the cornerstones of that culture in the community, is really the establishment of an ecosystem. And you think that's something that's super, super integral to the success of esports. It's really the attitudes, the commitment, the fandom, everything surrounding it. That seems to be something that's really pushed esports to the next level in the last couple of years.
I think we have a long way to go, but I do think that's a good bet. I think a good bet for anyone designing an esports program today would be to do it in a way that empowers, enables, incentivizes other groups to invest along with you as a publisher or you as a tournament operator. Like if you think about the Overwatch League, so for those who don't know, we launched a league in January around our game Overwatch. It's the first city-based esports league in history, and it's the first esports league with permanent franchise slots. And
the first global sports
It's also the first global sports league, right? Because not only in esports, but in any sport, there's no sport that I can think of or no league that I can think of where, Shanghai plays Dallas in the regular season. That just hasn't been a thing. And it's partly because, the only really global game, soccer, isn't organized as a single league, and every other league doesn't have a global game. The NBA and the NFL would love to have franchises in Shanghai, but they can't because their game's not global.
There are those of us that sort of take a moment to question terms like the World Series.
When I lived in England, I used to get a little
fired up about
that. Well, no. Other people would get fired up about it. Baseball. That's the one with the World Series. Congratulations, Americans.
World champions of football. So Overwatch is far beyond that.
So think about Overwatch. So we stood up a league in a year or so. And the launch is considered a success, and the viewership numbers have been very encouraging, and there really seem to be fans, sort of attaching themselves to this league and to a lot of the teams. But I think the important point about the Overwatch League is that we didn't do it by ourselves. We did it in partnership with 12 franchise owners who made real investments, both financial and in terms of focus of their organizations and just commitment. And these are great partners. These are guys like the Kraft organization who own the New England Patriots in Boston, and the Kroenke organization who own Arsenal and the LA Rams in LA.
How important do you think it has been that you're bringing organizations like that who have existing knowledge?
I think the important thing,
sports leagues.
The important thing is that we brought some of them and some endemic esports organizations that knew the esports world and put them together to learn from each other. But the combination of partners that we brought to the table, like, they invested as much as we did in bringing this thing to life. And then when you include the brand partners that launched with us, so we launched with HP and Intel and T-Mobile and Mondelez, a big sweets holding company, and Toyota. Like, those are
Sour Patch Kids.
Well, that's Mondelez. Yeah, Sour Patch Kids is the brand. But each of those organizations committed not just financially, but focus and time and executive energy on making this league successful. And so when you ask about the ecosystem, I do think it's important. I think it can't just be one organization trying to build awareness and relevance and revenue. You have to be thoughtful about building the incentives so that you can bring a bunch of partners together to do it as a group. That's what makes leagues like the NBA work so well. Think about how much Nike did for the NBA when it attached itself to Michael Jordan. That commitment by Nike to the player and by extension to the league has a lot to do with why the NBA is doing well.
Makes complete sense. And I think as a product, Overwatch League speaks to me a little bit in that way that the ecosystem has formed in and around it with the NBA. I think basketball has always had a sort of DNA that's cultural, that's woven incredibly deep into the league, into fans and players, whether it's sneaker culture, it's video games, it's sort of a social awareness, a progressive, young, very, very active on social media. So like that fan of the NBA really stands out to me in a way that it seems like Overwatch League fans have just absolutely latched on to the product. What would you say has been one of the most surprising things that you've seen about in such a short period since launch? I mean, you have a rabid fan base.
Yeah, so the way we launched the league, it's a city-based league, so there's 12 franchises that are associated with 12 cities around the world. But for this season, the teams aren't playing in their city. They're all playing in Burbank in Los Angeles. And in other words, like the big idea, or one of the big ideas that we brought to the table with the Overwatch League was this kind of city-based, hey, you're going to unlock fans because you're going to be in local markets, speaking to fans as a local entity. You're going to bring people to your events. You're going to build community at the local level. That's going to unlock a whole lot of fans who may not pay attention to Overwatch as an esport otherwise. And if you think about it, like we haven't gotten there yet. Like it hasn't happened. Like what we actually launched in January was not the thing that it was not the thing that we're doing. Like it was part of what we're doing, but that
just the beginning.
It's even like it's like warm-ups. Like we're not in our local markets yet. And so the thing that surprised me was that despite that, there's still a bunch of local fans. Like there's still fans popping up. And I mean, you walk down around the halls even here at South by, and there's a lot of Houston Outlaws jerseys and
backpacks.
And they're giving some away, and I'm sure that contributes to it. But we see it in the viewership numbers. We see spikes around the areas where we, the cities where we have teams during their games. We see viewing parties popping up with hundreds or thousands of people getting together to watch their team play on a stream in a venue, even though the team's not physically there.
I've seen some just wild New York Excelsior things that blow my mind.
Little like pop-up viewing parties.
Yeah, it's absolutely outstanding.
It's so cool. And then there's the spontaneous stuff. Like there was a Kotaku article. I wish I could have been there because it was like, I think of it as like the birth of local esports. But there was a piece on a bartender that put an Overwatch preseason match in December up on the big screen at the bar at a bar in San Francisco, and most of the people in the bar didn't know exactly what they were looking at. You know, they knew they were watching San Francisco play LA, and they knew that they were supposed to care about that. And I think over the course of the match, they started to figure out a little more about what they were watching. Like, when was San Francisco doing something good? When were they, you know, losing momentum? And then by the end of the match, the whole bar broke out in a "Beat LA" chant. Which
can't beat that.
It's so cool, because, you know, it's like, that's the hypothesis we were trying to prove, that like when you make something relevant to a local fan base, like they'll invest into it. They will then decide, okay, I'm going to invest in this because you've given them a reason to care.
I think too, one of my favorite things about being an Overwatch League fan is I've seen sort of this loop of communication and feedback develop a little bit on social media. That's sort of, you know, fan brings a sign in the audience. I'm going to say, let Zenyatta walk. The broadcast takes notice of it. The devs are watching the broadcast, and then we are just absolutely gifted or horrified with an actual video of Zenyatta walking, which is just amazing to me that there's that level of reaction and responsiveness to fans so far, with the developers really just adding a sort of richness to the entire fan experience that's been really special.
Yeah, it's a real advantage that esports have, I think, over traditional sports, is that, you know, we don't just operate the league, we operate the game. You know, like the NFL doesn't operate football. They operate a league based on football. And if they did operate football, you might see signs at NFL games that said, like, let the ball explode or something. And like, they'd have to decide whether that's a good idea.
I may have seen that sign at some point.
But even if they, you know, wanted to make the ball explode, like, you know, it's football. They don't own football. You know, there's some kind of purity around the game of football, I guess, that makes it hard for them to touch. But we can have more fun with it. You know, we can we can bring fans into the experience of not just the sport, but the game itself through things like that. And so, yeah, every game, for those who haven't seen it, every match, you know, fans at the front of the arena will hold up signs suggesting things to the game developers, like let Zenyatta walk. Zenyatta's a hero that kind of floats around, and they're like, "What? We want to see it walk." And so then
it was actually really terrifying.
Literally the next day.
There's a reason that they didn't let him make him walk in the first place.
Make Zenyatta not walk.
Yeah, he floats. He's cool.
But it's fan engagement at the end of the day. You know, it's like it's an opportunity again that we have, and I think there's some traditional sports leagues that do it much better than others. You know, some traditional sports leagues lock down things like highlights and say, you know, only we will be distributing clips of anything related to our games. And then other leagues say, you know, actually, you know, it's great for the league to have fans taking that content and making it their own. You know, I think the idea of kind of bringing input into the game from fans is just taking that attitude to another level.
Yeah, I think it's been really fantastic. We've talked a little bit about the regional fan bases. There are hypothetically some plans to expand Overwatch League over the next couple of years, as you mentioned. How do you see those regional fan bases developing as the league expands? Sort of what's on the horizon there for you in an ideal situation? Yeah.
Well, so right now we have 12 teams, 9 in North America, 2 in Asia, and 1 in the UK. And we've announced that we plan to expand this year. We haven't announced a number of expansion teams, but I will say we want to balance the league. We want to use this year's expansion process to balance the league a little more geographically. Yeah. So you know, right now we're very proud that we're the first global sports league, but you know, we're still pretty densely concentrated in North America. Mm-hmm. So we'd like to have more teams in Europe, more teams in Asia. We're very interested in parts of Latin America and the Middle East, and you know, we'll get there. I mean, we have said that ultimately the league will be a 28-team league, and with a very nice distribution around the world. we have a real opportunity this year because of the momentum coming out of the launch to work with the best possible owners in the cities that matter most to us, which are the cities where our players live. So when we set out to design the league and find our owners, the very first thing we did before saying, oh, we really want to work with that group, we said, here's the list of cities that are most important to us. And it wasn't just a list of the biggest cities in the world. There are a lot of the biggest cities in the world that aren't on the list, and that's because in those cities there aren't as many people playing Overwatch as there are in some smaller cities. So we made this list of like best Overwatch cities, and then set out to find the best owner in each city. And there's still some really great Overwatch cities that we don't have teams in.
Right. Speaking of regional teams, I think it's been really enjoyable too in the last couple of months to sort of see how individual players and teams, internally have developed chemistry, personality. I said that as a fan when I was first starting to watch the league, I couldn't decide who I wanted to root for. I needed my home team. Just because I didn't know enough about them. I think part of being a fan and having that sense of really being invested in the individuals and the whole culture around it is sort of knowing that. I feel like we've had some stars emerge on social media, some really fun things from the teams. On digital, I've seen a lot of even organic team-centric video series coming out. I know the Valiant are doing sort of a behind-the-scenes thing. You currently have one of your casters living in a treehouse after a lost bet.
True.
It's true. He seems like he's having a great time.
Treehouses are awesome. Like, who wouldn't want to live in a treehouse?
Can't really go wrong there. But there are other sort of benchmark moments in league development. I think one of those is, as you're sort of creating characters, you're going to see sort of the best and a little bit of negativity from certain people. With the release of XQC from Dallas Fuel last week, do you think that you'll look back at that as sort of a milestone moment for league development, or just as individuals existing sort of in that community, how it sort of is, it may change the league itself? I've seen articles ranging from, everybody has their own opinion on it, but even suggesting that the players should be unionizing. It seems like months into the league, that's sort of shocking for me to read. Not in premise, but just sort of the time that has elapsed and really that developing so quickly. Yeah.
Look, the reality is when you've got 12 teams and up to 12 players on each team, that's a lot of players who are individual human beings with individual personalities and agendas and priorities. And no league can pretend to be in sort of complete control over the behavior of 100% of its players.
Not at all.
That said, Overwatch it's a positive game, positive, optimistic, bright, diverse, inclusive vision of the future is reflected through that game. And we want our league to be the best possible example of what a great community around the game can look like. And so I actually think, people talk a lot about toxicity. I think, and then there's an argument that, in esports, because the game is competitive, like at the highest possible level, you're sort of flaming the fires of the kind of most aggressive element of a gaming community. And I don't quite see it that way. Like I actually think at the highest level in esports, a league like ours has an opportunity to show in a really bright light an example of what the community needs to be, and that it's our job to tell the right stories to set those exampons, and to correct behavior when we see the wrong examples. And so I think what you'll start to see emerge out of this league is are those positive stories, and the sort of the heroes that we think are, and the audience thinks are the best examples of what what an Overwatch player is. Yeah, there was a lot to your question, though. I think I answered about a third of it.
No, I think it makes complete sense. That behavior is contradictory to sort of the message that you feel the game and the league sends, and the community is very positive. I think one of the things that I've noticed the most is I didn't know what to expect when I went to a match in Burbank, and a lot of families, a lot of young kids, young parents who just seem super savvy about esports, and it's really a fun, like you said, bright, inclusive experience, and I think that that's something that struck me in person especially. So
yeah, it is. I mean, it's a game that that I play on my bed with my 2 young daughters watching, and they always say, play Mercy, like they don't want me to shoot people, they want me to help people, and the game gives me that option, and it's a very family-friendly game, and I guess in terms of surprises, that's probably another surprise. Actually, I didn't expect as many families in live experiences as we've seen, and I think it's so cool. It's young parents have this activity that they can bond with their kids over, because the game itself is accessible to a 9-year-old and to
total
or a 14-year-old and a 40-year-old, and just feels like the kind of world that a lot of parents, I think, want to expose their kids to. And again, like at that point, it's up to us to make the experience of viewing the game and to sort of highlight the best elements of the game so that that continues.
Mm-hmm. We're going to touch on something that you mentioned earlier. When we first spoke about this, you described Overwatch League to me as the fans it is young, global, and digital. And it feels, I think you said the average viewer is just 25 years old. In an era when traditional sports leagues, cable companies, sports media outlets are struggling to really adapt to changing viewership and how to reach those people, millennials, cord cutters, it seems that all of this being digitally native, it's just structures it in a way that is just going to take off. The success in it exists in its inherent structure, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things I've learned working in entertainment is that, it's always a safe bet to bet on younger. Younger is another way of saying the future. And especially if we can start to get that kind of multi-generational flywheel going that I talked about, where parents are passing it down to their kids, I think, it's a very good bet. But yeah, I mean, traditional sports, I hate to bash. I mean, I'm a huge sports fan, and
we're in a safe place.
No, we're not.
I'm kidding.
But yeah, I mean, the average age of an NFL fan has gone up from 40 to 50 in the last decade. And baseball fans are like 65 on average. And
you can find any.
I mean, just 65 is the average. So, or I think it's the median. But imagine how many 90-year-olds have to be watching for 65 to be the median or the average. But and even the sports that are considered kind of young, like UFC and NBA and soccer, have fans in their like mid to late 40s. And I think it's partly in some cases, it's like baseball's a very slow game, and it's easy to sort of see why that might not appeal to a young audience that has grown up with very fast-paced entertainment. But I don't think there's anything about like basketball or UFC that's inherently not interesting to young people necessarily. I think part of the reason that the averages are so high is that all of those sports, every traditional sport that we talk about as an important one, is on TV. And young people don't watch TV. And so these things are, have to be considered together. And esports has and just take Overwatch League, has a very young audience by comparison, like half the age of the NFL on average. And it's partly because the content appeals to that audience, and it's partly because it's the game that they're playing, but it's also partly because of how accessible the content is. I mean, the content is on every device. You don't have to pay for it. You don't have to jump through subscription hoops, and that, I think, is an expectation. That sort of platform ubiquity is an expectation that young people have that traditional sports aren't really responding to.
Right. I feel like in the rights deal with Twitch, Overwatch League instantly became incredibly accessible to a lot more fans than I think even initially the NFL or a lot of traditional sports leagues know how to attract. How has that partnership been an integral part of sort of the success you've seen thus far?
Yeah, Twitch has been a great partner, and have done a lot of thinking not only about how to get the broadest audience for our content, but how to build experiences around watching that the fans love. With like cheer motes, and there's some other cool things coming, but I think platforms like Twitch, and there are other great digital platforms too, but these platforms have an advantage over TV in that they can build really engaging functionality around the viewing window that you can't do on TV. You can't lean in to the big piece of glass on your wall that in ways that you can with the platform.
Interactivity feels incredibly appealing to people who are really involved in it, I think.
Yeah, and look, it's like it sort of feeds itself, right? It's appealing to the crowd, and because you give it to them, they engage with it and they expect it next time, and then they want new features to engage with, and it just changes. I think the sort of most meta story you could write about esports right now is about how the experience of engaging in esports, whether it's on a platform like Twitch or in a live event, or engaging with the developers, through signs that you hold up in the broadcast, like that experience of engaging with esports is redefining what audiences expect out of live entertainment.
Completely unique.
Out of live entertainment, not even sports, just like live entertainment, like their expectations. There's a whole new set of expectations now for what live entertainment is because of this phenomena.
Right. I think super successful story the first couple of months. It seems as though the model for Overwatch League is something that Activision Blizzard specifically feels very proud of and very excited about, and it's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and expanding. Do you foresee other esports possibly adapting to that model going forward?
Broadly within our portfolio, what are you asking?
Yes.
Broadly and within our portfolio?
Yeah.
Look, I think when somebody establishes a model, others look at it, and it works, others look at it and say, how could that work for us? So I do expect people to watch closely what we're doing, and if it continues to work, for them to try it out in ways that make sense for them. As for our portfolio, I mean, Activision Blizzard publishes a lot of great titles. Many great esport programs are built around those titles. Starting with one of the original esport titles, StarCraft, and there's a vibrant scene around games like World of Warcraft and Heroes of the Storm, and Hearthstone and Call of Duty. Call of Duty is probably the most analogous when you're comparing, it to Overwatch, and so
commercially it was very popular. There's a huge fan base already. There is an existing, esports component to it now as
very popular esports scene around Call of Duty.
Organically, there was with Overwatch even early on.
And so. You can imagine that as things start to work in the model that we're building in Overwatch League, they will think of ways to sort of bring some of those ideas and what works to other games. Call of Duty in particular is I love the game, and I love the esports scene around it. I actually love watching it more than I like playing it, and that's encouraging. It's a relatively easy game to watch and fun game to watch, and I think as an esport, it has just massive potential,
yeah.
especially in the West. And so, I've been spending a lot of time. My team has been spending a lot of time thinking about like what the next step for Call of Duty might look like as an esport.
Great. I think another thing that sort of stood out to me from a production standpoint. I come from a TV background, so I'm incredibly sort of enamored with the way that a lot of the complementary programming for Overwatch League has developed. So you guys are doing Watch Point. Like I mentioned, that there's a lot of sort of team activity. They're doing their own branded series on social media. That's just providing even more opportunities for fans to just consume and engage with the brand. Do you think that's something you're sort of prioritizing on building out as sort of the league develops?
For sure.
Contenders even? Yeah,
so it's a good point. So we talk a lot about Overwatch League. Really, there's a lot around Overwatch League that you have to also talk about when you talk about like what makes it work. One is are the tiers of competition below the league itself that ladder players up to the top. We spend a lot of time recently sort of, it feels like presenting that in a more forward-facing manner, as tied to the league. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like we want an audience at that level, and then we want commitment and intrigue and interest in the players that come from that level to carry through to the league. We think that is a big opportunity. And then with things like Watch Point, so we do a studio show twice a week about the Overwatch League. We do a look ahead and a look back episode around each week's action, and it's great. It's it looks maybe something like Inside the NBA or a football studio show. It's very well produced, high quality content. I'd put it up there. The production value is tremendous. Cool. Yeah, it's awesome. So enjoyable to watch. I think it looks at least as good as anything on ESPN, frankly. Shots fired. And really the value of that, it's one, just kind of keeping the drumbeat going throughout the week when there's not action, but also like building storylines, building players, building heroes, building household names. Well, it feels like the talent too are really engaged in sort of driving that community and their brands within sort of the league itself has been really cool. So we got the 15-minute flash. I think that means we have to ask people to ask us questions, or we get to decide. Okay. I have some questions that I can wrap up pretty quickly, sort of about the future, about a little bit of money, and then if we would like to open the floor to questions, that would be awesome. So cool. I'll be brief. In January, Morgan Stanley. A report from Morgan Stanley estimated that esports will be a $1.5 billion industry by 2020. Just very short time, less than 2 years away. They had previously reported prior to the launch of Overwatch League that with a 36-team expansion, so whether that figure is accurate or not, that's sort of what they were going off of, in a very strong market, that Overwatch League could generate up to $720 billion in revenue, which would you might want to check that number. That's in 2020. No, this is separate. So this is 2020 was the article that came out. In January as a whole, the esports industry is 1.5 billion. The 720 million number was million. You said billion. I said billion. You said billion. Sorry, got excited. Maybe I would maybe like it to be a billion, and then I'll get involved, buy my Powerball tickets. I apologize, $720 million, which would put it in the same realm as properties like the WWE, even probably ahead of what I read was Major League Soccer's revenue, which to me is just an astounding number. Do you think that the league's performance thus far indicates that it has that level of potential and the ambition to just keep on driving it to that point of financial success? Yeah, I think it's already been a commercial success, even at least relative to our ambitions at this stage. I think I see a ton of upside commercially because of that ecosystem I mentioned before. I think partners are really starting to pay attention and become very interested in what we're doing, and we know we can bring a lot of value to those partnerships. I won't comment on specific numbers or timelines, but I will say we're very encouraged by where we are today, and so are our owners. I think they again, they made a real investment to be part of this league a year ago, took a big risk to be part of it before we launched. Really all they saw was a PowerPoint presentation and a financial model and a lot of really committed looking people. And I think at this point, if you polled them, I think they'd say that they feel very good about their investment.
People feel incredibly confident in the product.
Just very, confident in their investment, and that's an important hurdle for us. If we can keep them happy, if we can keep franchise values increasing, keep expanding the league with great owners, and attracting great brand partners and media partners, then I don't see any reason why this league, from a commercial perspective, can't be one of the most successful among all the sports leagues out there.
Great, wonderful. Anybody have any questions they would like to come up to the center of the room? Come on down.
Okay, I usually do these questions off the cuff, but I wrote this one down because it seemed like it would be quite important. So as the industry develops, more resources are going to be needed to be dumped into the advertisement and marketing. How do big brands such as yours and South by Southwest balance the two and respect key influencers such as local celebrities or live stream partners?
So if I just want to make sure I understand. So how do we balance
It's kind of like more of a question based on talent acquisition and having a source of media training for esports athletes or key influencers in the IRL sections or wherever brands can go for the influencer marketing section.
Okay. So, look, I think there's a lot in there. I think I'll pick a couple of the things you asked about. So I think in terms of media training for our players and sort of working closely with influencers, I think that esports is unique in that so many of these players and personalities in the league have come out of a world where the fact that they haven't been media trained is sort of part of their appeal, and the fact that they engage so directly and authentically and and openly with fans is part of what makes them have fans. On the other hand, the league has goals and priorities, and we want to make sure that, to the point I made earlier, that we're kind of representing the best of the community whenever we can. And so that's a balancing act that we're constantly thinking about. I will say that it's important to me and everybody at the league to make sure that the players don't lose that kind of that realness that attracts a lot of fans to them in the first place, because we know it benefits us.
Do you have a comment on the matter?
I was listening to, I think another part of your question was sort of developing the sort of almost native advertising, like the community support with streamers and talent acquisition. We were talking a little bit before. I just think as the league expands, there are going to be, it seems like to me, outsider looking in, a ton of opportunities for people to get involved in whatever, way they wish as a fan, whether it's, there's a ton of Overwatch League content out there produced by fans. We were talking about the High Noon podcast earlier, the Around the Payload show that's you can watch on Twitch, or I think they clip it off on YouTube as well. I think there are ways to feel influential, whether it's as a fan, and it's sort of up to you individually whether you want to parlay that into something more like becoming a streamer, whether you're a streamer. Like, you know, this week we saw Ninja take over the entire world with just, you know, one night because his name is synonymous with Fortnite. And so I think there are people like that. There are ways to be involved in something, whether it's professionally or, you know, passionately, and sort of exploring how that evolves in the next couple of years will certainly be interesting.
True competition.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
My name's Sarah Schneider, and as a girl gamer, what do you foresee for the future of females in esports and inclusion?
You just look like you want to answer that. I'll quickly say that I can't wait to see more female professional players coming into scenes like Overwatch. We've got our first. Giguri is getting started. Actually, I don't know if we've announced the exact date. Okay, within a couple weeks, she'll be officially on the Shanghai Dragons roster and playing, marking a pretty important moment when, you know, for the first time a female is playing at the highest level. And that's going to continue because there's nothing about this game that makes it harder for a woman than a man, and with more examples like Giguri out there, you know, I think more women are going to be drawn to try to compete at the highest level, and I think it's awesome. I think it's awesome. There just aren't many sports. There's very few sports where you can even you know, attempt something like that, and so if we get to be one where it's possible, then that just seems to open up a lot of doors.
Thank you.
I think just my 2 cents is that I come from a traditional sports background. I started my career at ESPN. I was constantly surrounded by, you know, my male counterparts. Most of my managers and my mentors and people higher up in the company have always been male. But I think there are a lot of women in gaming behind the scenes and behind the scenes in sports. I was a producer. Our NBA coverage at ESPN is almost entirely produced by women, which is something that I don't think people understand, and that's something that I think struck me when I started to learn about Overwatch. Is there are plenty of women involved at Activision Blizzard in general, I think, but sort of just because you're not competing in the game doesn't mean that you're not involved. I'm a gamer. I am a woman. I do not feel like I am at any sort of disadvantage contributing to that community just because I'm female. The fact that I'm here answering this question and you're here asking it is just super important that that dialogue is happening, and I think that's what matters.
Thank you.
Obviously, with the esports works around the popularity of the game. Obviously, it needs a big fan base for it to work. But if a new game comes out that is more popular than that, even one released by Blizzard and Activision, I mean, would the plan be to transition from doing Overwatch leagues to something else, or would you put them side by side? And what would be the plan around that if the fan base does move?
So no, the plan would not be to like try to move the teams and players from Overwatch to some other game. When our owners bought franchises, they bought permanent franchises in a league built on Overwatch, the game, Overwatch the franchise, meaning that, you know, Overwatch itself may change.
Okay.
I don't.
The big plan is try and keep Overwatch.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that, you know, the way that people will be playing Overwatch, and I don't know how people will be playing Overwatch in 50 years, but the bet is that they will be playing Overwatch in 50 years, and that, frankly, this league will help with that longevity story in the same way that other leagues do for their games. You know, I think basketball would be a lot less relevant without the NBA, and so like a league and a competitive scene around a game can really help extend its relevance.
Yeah, I still remember playing like Counter-Strike when I was in high school. So games can obviously stick around.
It's
Still a relevant game. I mean, if you think about it, like the landscape of real esport titles hasn't changed that much. Like a couple have come into the scene, but not many have gone out. And there's a lot of games that probably could have esports scenes around them. Like it takes a lot to kind of find the sweet spot of what makes a game a good esport. And once you found it, like it can stick around for a long time.
And that'd be the second part of my question is, do you think there's a limited capacity to the number of games we could have in esports leagues, or could that?
I think there's probably a limited capacity to the number that get kind of the massive investment and kind of partner and kind of ecosystem investment. But I don't think there's a limit to the number that can be played competitively, you know, in championship type tournaments any more than you could say that about traditional sports, you know. Like I think the audience has an appetite for, you know, a few big ones and then a whole lot of small ones. I could see that applying to the esports scene as well.
Cool, thank you.
Hi, I just had a quick question. Going back to Call of Duty esports, do you think that it's sustainable for Call of Duty to continue playing their tournaments on a new game every year? Because that's sort of what separates Call of Duty from other esports, in that it's a different game every year. And do you think that's sustainable?
Yeah. No, it's a good question and a good debate. I'll tell you that there are arguments on both sides of the debate that are good arguments. You know, and I'm not going to get into the debate now or tell you which side I fall on, but I will say that it's a priority for us as a company to align on our perspective on exactly that question, like this year.
And do you think console esports in general are going anywhere?
I hope so.
Well, yeah, I don't see any reason why not. I think. You know, I think PC gaming has some advantages over console gaming from a kind of spectator experience perspective, but console gaming has some advantages over PC gaming in like mass marketing and you know, retail kind of co-marketing and just sort of building the game into something that is, you know, ubiquitous within a culture. So I think there's absolutely an opportunity to build a big console esports scene, and I would point to Call of Duty as a good example of that.
We need to wrap it up.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I'm sorry we didn't get to the last question. We're fresh out of time. Thank you, Pete. This was fantastic, and I feel much more educated. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I hope you have a lovely Saturday, and thank you, South by Southwest, for having us.